Hello, Political Wizard here. I'm probably going to get into trouble for this, but somebody's got to say something about it.
Just before the 2024 general election, Sir Keir Starmer, our current Prime Minister, was asked whether there was any plan for the United Kingdom to rejoin the European Union. This was his response.
On the question of rejoining the EU, that isn't going to happen. That question was answered when we had a referendum in the UK some years ago. So that's settled. But I do think that we can have a better, closer relationship when it comes to trade and security. I'll be discussing this evening on questions of energy and on trade and the economy. And I think that's in the UK's interest, and I believe it's in the EU's interests as well.
While what he had to say about our needing to strengthen ties with the EU was correct, his reason for saying our position re-EU membership was settled is entirely incorrect. The 2016 referendum never constituted a decision and never created a mandate for Britain to leave the EU. This was a deliberate deception perpetrated by the Conservatives, who wanted Britain out for their own selfish purposes. The legal position regarding the 2016 referendum is very clear, but has never had full media coverage, as I intend to explain. Very shortly after the 2016 referendum, a number of lawyers backed Gina Miller in a Supreme Court challenge regarding whether one of the United Kingdom's non-substantive, advisory-only, referendums could actually create a democratic mandate for such major constitutional change as to take the nation out of the EU. The Supreme Court ruled that the referendum result emphatically did not constitute a mandate-forming decision to leave the EU and that only an enacted parliamentary decision would suffice. Within a couple of days of the Supreme Court ruling, the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill was given its second and final reading in Parliament. This is the piece of legislation that many people think is the legislation that confirmed the supposed decision to leave the EU, but listen to what comes next. Before the second reading of the bill, David Davis, the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union, gave an address, which contained the following statement. This is not a bill about whether the UK should leave the EU, or indeed how it should do so. It is simply about Parliament empowering the government to implement a decision already made, a point of no return already passed. We asked the people of the UK if they wanted to leave the European Union, they decided they did. Which, as Davis would clearly be aware of the Supreme Court decision, was an act of deliberate misdirection of Parliament on his behalf. No one listening to that speech would be under any illusion that the act they were voting on would constitute a parliamentary decision to leave, or to instruct the Prime Minister to take Britain out of the EU. As can be seen from the text of the act, there is no direction given, just permission to notify of intention to withdraw from the EU. The second section aims to remove the Prime Minister from any obligations under the European Communities Act, 1972, which solidified our membership of the common market and actually would have given the UK reason to remain in the single market and customs union. Nothing in the 2016 referendum ballot mentioned abandoning the market membership negotiated under our subscription to the common market. It is very clear that the main purpose of this act was to defer the European Communities Act for the purpose of notification of intent to withdraw from the single market, which would not have been mandated by the EU referendum, even if it had not been advisory only. I will now hand over to the work done by journalist John Danzig, regarding this discrepancy in the legal status of Brexit. Who decided for the UK to leave the EU? Was his root question. It wasn't the 2016 EU referendum, because it was only advisory, as confirmed by the Supreme Court back in early 2017. But it was also not Parliament, who were never allowed a say in the matter, and were told that the referendum actually was a decision, despite the solid legal ruling otherwise. But the Supreme Court had also ruled that only Parliament could decide to leave. Only, they didn't, did they? There was never a debate within Parliament, based on the evidence produced by the 2016 consultative referendum, to ascertain whether we should leave the EU, or take some other action, regarding the very close margin of the votes. David Davis, acting in error, told Parliament, despite the Supreme Court ruling, which he neglected to mention, that the decision to leave resided in the outcome of the referendum. And this remained the Tories' public stance, despite what happened next. In June 2018, there was a permission hearing in the High Court regarding the validity of Article 50, due to Davis misleading Parliament and the, by now, tarnished and undeniably illegal status of the EU referendum. The problem being that illegal activity on both sides of the debate had influenced the outcome, to the point where it was impossible to discern if democracy had actually taken place. The referendum was therefore refuted as a source of mandate to pursue Brexit, and it was ruled that only one person had made a decision to take the UK out of the EU. This being Theresa May, exclusively and individually, indulging in an extremely important executive decision without any direction from Parliament or any other democratic mandate. And Theresa May compounded this attack on democracy by stating misleadingly in her letter to the President of the European Union Council that the people of the United Kingdom had made the decision to leave the European Union, despite this being legally and constitutionally untrue. Parliament had only given the Prime Minister permission, without direction, to give notice of intention to withdraw. There was no firm decision involved. So the Prime Minister not only chose to act without parliamentary direction, but she overstepped the empowerment of the Notification of Withdrawal Act, and effectively lied to the Council regarding a decision that did not exist. So what does this mean in respect to Brexit? What follows may seem like just boring legalese, but it has potentially critical implications. Essentially, it means that the legal foundation for the initiating legislation is undemocratic and was passed in contravention to existing law. Which means that any further legislation resulting from this foundation is also potentially illegal and therefore unconstitutional. Britain's constitution being based on its statutes. The first paragraph of Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union requires that the decision to withdraw must be in accordance with the member states' own constitutional requirements. But this discrepancy strongly suggests that those constitutional requirements have not been adhered to. This may be a way to reverse Brexit without having to rejoin. At this point, people tend to argue that Brexit has happened and can't be revoked. The answer to this is that we don't know until we try. As far as the people of Britain are concerned, the basis for Brexit is the result of the 2016 EU referendum. But the evidence here is that the Conservatives abandoned the referendum as a mandate as early as 2017 and instead just worked from their own desire for a hard Brexit, while lying to the public that the referendum result was sacrosanct. This is such a clear manipulation by a party in power, it's likely that it could easily be used to provide a firm basis for an appeal to the European Court of Justice. The benefit of this approach is that success would lead to reinstatement without having to reapply. If we were successful, it would be likely to come with some conditions, but the UK would be much better off than we currently are in terms of price of food and the economy in general. It would also mean that Labour would not have to break any manifesto promises, as it would not involve reapplying. So why is Keir Starmer sticking with the same deception the Tories used for 8 years? There are several possible explanations. To begin with, he may be unaware that the discrepancy exists. The official line was so far from the truth that it may have been easy, even for an MP to be gaslighted by it. I have not seen any MPs even mention the legal issues with Brexit. As far as I know, only myself and John Danzig have pursued it online, and John has not mentioned the potential for appeal. I have written to my MP and a couple of other high-profile MPs about this, but I have not received any acknowledgement, and it may well have just gone into an angry Remainers pile and been forgotten. On the other hand, it just may not be considered desirable. Brexit divided the nation and had a profound effect on Labour, especially with the red wall swing seats being profoundly pro-Brexit, despite the majority of the membership being pro-Europe. They may feel that this would only revive old hostility, especially as the pro-Brexit supporters were capable of horrendous harassment of public figures. So either political expediency or cowardice may be at play. They may also feel that it is not worth courting rejection by the ECJ, which is obviously absurd. Not trying something because it may not work is the peak of stupidity. From a moral point of view, any responsible government, being made aware of a way of reversing a change that has damaged our economy by between 4 and 9%, should be doing all it can to initiate that process of reversal. Cowardice and political expediency are not options. And what other possible outcomes? Rejection of the appeal is unlikely. The EU are fully aware of the illegalities surrounding the referendum but were unable to do anything about it at the time, considering it a British domestic matter for us to sort out. There may have been one or two similar appeals brought by individuals, which were rejected, but an appeal with the representative power of the government of Britain behind it would be treated with much more seriousness. Past rulings on minor appeals should not interfere. So, the outcome on appeal may be complete reinstatement with conditions, which may include joining the euro or introducing proportional representation, or there may be rejection of the appeal but leave to join the single market or initiate some other form of partial agreement. And I feel that I must emphasize that any ECJ ruling will absolutely not be subject to a decision from the EU Assembly. It will not be subject to veto from any members disgruntled by our leaving. If successful, it will involve reinstatement and not rejoining. The very worst outcome would be rejection, but even then such an appeal would indicate a deeper will to be involved in Europe. With the escalating threats from both Russia and the US, this is a good time for Britain to align more closely with the EU. Other advantages would include full exposure of the Conservatives' duplicity in manipulating into place the kind of destructive Brexit they desired and blowing apart the bogus claims regarding the alleged democratic supremacy of Brexit, which would smooth the way to better relationship with the EU and may revisit the Tories' irresponsibility over the last decade and a half enough to prevent people from voting for them and help protect Britain from further damage. Is there anything we can do to get the government to investigate this option? We need to draw our MPs' attention to this option and insist that they pursue it. I would personally like to start a petition, but my internet footprint has been very restricted since my Facebook and Instagram accounts were hacked a few months ago. I would be very grateful if someone with wider access could start one off via the government petitions webpage. Otherwise, please share this video in whatever form you encounter it in. I will be sending a copy to my MP. I can't overemphasize the importance of this and the deception it represents. The law is meant to be the means by which we can call the government to account and, between 2015 and 2024, the Conservatives treated it with utter contempt. They ignored a Supreme Court ruling and did their best to bury it, as they did with the illegalities surrounding the EU referendum campaigns and the parliamentary requirements required following an advisory referendum. The information I have shared here was suffocated by the mainstream media. The only major outlets that I know covered it were The Guardian and The James O'Brien Show on LBC. Please do all you can to get this information out there and encourage Labour to appeal to the European Court of Justice. The Conservatives and Nigel Farage conspired together to steal Britain's future. Let's snatch it back if we can. Please like, share and subscribe if you find this on YouTube.